like to thank Jed for that presentation. There were a lot of interesting ideas, I think, that were presented, and I anticipate that moving forward, a lot of these ideas, especially those that require a change in thinking and a change in overall approach in the way that we tackle issues relating to transport will be front and center in this ongoing discussion at the level of policymakers, government, and advocates. But let me just give a my brief reaction, zeroing in on some of the points that I particularly found compelling in the presentation, and also to talk about our own experience with respect to transport issues during the pandemic, uh, in relation to some of the points that Jed was raising earlier. So first of all, I just like to echo the assertion he made at the outset with respect to treating mobility as a human right. I think that one of the clearest indicators of the fundamental nature of mobility and its importance in the lives of basically everybody is that when the lockdown was imposed way back in March, one of the things that we first had to respond to was really the shortage of public transport. A lot we got a lot of feedback coming from frontliners, people working in the hospitals, people working in essential industries, who because of the shutdown and because of the unavailability of public transport, had no way to get to their places of work. And in addition to that, you had a lot of people who needed to get essential services, like people who needed to get medicine, or people who needed to get to hospitals or clinics. And again, they had no private vehicles, and therefore they were in the absence of public transport. They were completely out of options. I'm sure everybody here read about news articles detailing, the travails of people who had to walk from Cavite all the way to hospitals located in Metro Manila. Uh, so in response to this, we initiated the free shuttle service in partnership with several private institutions. And this was the second initiative that the OBP pursued during the lockdown after the donation of personal protective equipment. And we really did not know much about public transport before we entered into this, but in the a month the month that the first month that we embarked on this initiative, and in the subsequent initiatives that we pursued after the modified ECQ was reimposed in Metro Manila, and also the similar initiative we pursued in Cebu, we did learn some lessons. And one of the first is really just to reiterate the initial premise of Jed's presentation. Mobility is really something that has to be considered a right. It has to be considered as one of the priorities for people living in the current modern environment. There's really no way you can say that you will support other rights, like for example, a person's right to health, or a person's right to food, or a person's right to education, if you cannot address the issue of mobility. Because simply put, you cannot access all these other needs, all these other essential services, if you are not able to get from your home to where these services are. If you cannot get to the hospital, if you cannot get to the drugstore, and in areas where we will already be opening schools, if you cannot get to your school. So definitely that should be a fundamental shift in mindset. And we saw that in the number of people who availed of the transport services that we provided on a limited basis during this lockdown. The second is Um, while it is important for advocates and policymakers to sit down and think through what plans are going to be implemented, at the end of the day, there should be uh, a mechanism by which feedback from the end users themselves, in this particular case, the commuters, should be put in place. We realized this early on in our experience in running shuttle services. We had plans, we had schedules, we had routes in place, we had certain stops designated. But in the course of actually providing this particular service, we realized that to improve the efficiency and I suppose the effectivity of this service, you had to take in feedback. So as a result of feedback we got from the people actually riding, we were able to improve the routes, the schedules, the places where they stop, the time when the services would start, and so on. And as we move on into a broader discussion of how we can reallocate road space or how we can change the overall approach to transport issues, we should not forget that there should be an ample amount of space given to feedback from actual commuters. That's one of the lessons that we learned. We passed on a lot of these experiences to DOTR after we ended the shuttle service program, and we hope that that kind of mindset also makes its way into the conversation and into the policy framework moving forward on this issue. Um, I also agree that apart from just recognizing the fundamental right, there is really a need to change mindset. Moving people and not vehicles, obviously, is an extremely important shift that we have to make. Instead of counting how much time a car will take to can travel from Cubao to Makati, we should be looking at the time of an average person riding public transport, or maybe taking a bicycle to traverse the same distance. So we definitely agree that that focus should be reshifted. But also, I need to point out that I don't know if this is just my understanding of the presentation, but we can't simply be talking about reallocating roads. Although I agree that in the short term, in particular, that has to be front and center in any discussion. But ultimately, in the long term, you also have to be talking about building or crafting better transport infrastructure overall. Because after all, if you are talking about changing behavior, not just at the policy level, but at the level of commuters. And when I say commuters, it's going to be the broader meaning. It's people who take public transport as well as people who take their own private vehicles. But changing behavior on the part of commuters in general also requires making viable options available. In other words, true. During the lockdown, a lot of people started walking, a lot of people started biking. But to a large extent, I think that was dictated by the amount of options available to them. In the absence of adequate public transport because of transport restrictions, people had to make do. So if we want that change to be a long-term shift in our attitudes towards transport as to what modes we can actually make use of, then we also need to make viable options available. And making viable options available to a certain extent involves, yes, reallocating road space, but it also requires building better transport infrastructure overall. I also agree that COVID and the subsequent steps taken to restrict movement and access is an opportunity. It's an opportunity because we can reimagine something more because of the current situation we are in. It's also an opportunity because we were able to identify certain key issues or key problems underlying a large part of the transport issue that we have been facing even prior to COVID. But the lockdown, I suppose, distilled and crystallized a lot of the problems, allowing us to have a deeper appreciation of what really are the fundamental issues that we are grappling with. And definitely, we should be taking this opportunity to once again revisit that discussion and revisit options that previously may not have really been taken seriously. This is really an opportunity to put them back on the table because of the new experience and the new insights we have gotten as a result of the experiences under lockdown. And then obviously there has to be a certain balance also struck in relation to the interests of transport of workers in the transportation industry. That's why I appreciated the part of Jed's discussion where he was talking about meeting with uh, jeepney operators, for example, or bus operators or bus drivers to discuss what role they can play or what space they can actually fill in a post-lockdown scenario where we are already trying to rethink and rebuild our entire infrastructure and our entire approach to transport as a key national concern and as a key people's issue. Just one last point before I end. We also can't just limit the discussion, I suppose, to people within the transport sector or people who are principally concerned with transport. Ultimately, when you talk about utilizing road space or you talk about transforming urban spaces, city spaces to be more people friendly and more conducive to moving people rather than vehicles, you will have to take up I suppose, competing uses for public space, and that's really that really goes into, I suppose, a broader framework into uses of public spaces in urban centers more generally. Obviously, transport will be a priority in any such discussion. But when you talk about creating parks or walkways, you will also have to deal with other competing concerns. What about people who are in the informal sector and who utilize these public spaces for vending or for other types of activities? Obviously, ideally, there should be a clear allocation of space for that, but as a reality that we have to confront, there has to be a certain level of discussion and involvement so that we can come to a space allocation for roads, walkways, and other shared public spaces that would accommodate the various uses and the various needs of people living in an urban city setting. But um, also, this is really going to be my last point. While we should definitely encourage talking about allocating bigger budgets for transport issues and for public transport services and for transport infrastructure, bigger budgets must also come hand in hand with clearer and better plans for as to how these budgets will be enacted. And again, I go back to some of the experiences under COVID. A lot of money was allocated for certain interventions relating to COVID-19. But again, in the absence of clear plans, plans that involved policymakers and experts in the discussion, and plans that had some kind of mechanism for feedback, the effectivity of spending these budgets can actually be severely hampered to the extent that the intention might not actually be attained, even if there is actually a larger allocation. So with that, I will simply close with a lot of what Jed said in his presentation were very thought provoking. I think that the mindset shift in particular that he is proposing is important, and that should really be we should really be pushing to utilize that as our fundamental framework to address transport issues moving forward. But I cannot overemphasize the need to make the discussion inclusive. And when I say inclusive, it means talking to all stakeholders, not just people principally concerned with transport, and having clearly detailed plans subject to greater discussion when we approach this particular problem. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, Jed, for the extremely thought-provoking and interesting presentation. And good afternoon to everyone.